the role of the Strategic Commission Board, we were able to secure an additional second-year funding for additional third sector family support, as an addition to the role of current family supports that are in place and the role of the family support intensive services team through social work. Again, last year, some committee members may remember me highlighting some of the challenges for the children family social work workforce. At that point, we were, as a service, we're experiencing between 55 and 60% capacity. And you know, on a positive note, I can advise that we were, you know, by and large, probably one of the most successful local authorities around recruitment in terms of a strategy and approach to that. We have changed the landscape of that up to a sort of a better capacity point of around 80 to 85%. However, vacancies within social work posts are still live. We're currently carrying 9 vacancies within social workers, and that probably accounts to around 225 children that we are not able to allocate within children and families. However, we did take forward a further test of change through out with placements, and the test of change was around commission family functional therapy, and that was looking at children who are at either ages of care or within an out with placement within residential or out with residential education, to provide an additionality to try and repair family breakdowns with the intention of achieving reunification with families and bringing them back to their own communities. Part of the role of the out with placement screening group is to identify children who are out with care where it would be appropriate to bring back to our communities, because one of the other unintended consequences of having children and young people placed out with is that their sense of community, identity, belonging is lost. They're our wains, effectively, and we have to bring them back either through transitions at 16, 17, 18, 19. And there are incredible challenges within that. And where our intention to meet need and out with care has been for the best intentions and part of an assessment, there are still complexities around children's needs when we bring them back. And what we want to do is wrap around our children and young people in East Ayrshire. We provide really good care in our children's houses. We provide excellent support around our education and our mainstream schools. It's trying to hold children here because that's where we're going to have the best opportunity to achieve the outcomes that we want for them moving into the young adults. In regards to risks, and I have profiled this within the report, there is a unpredictable factor within the unaccompanied asylum-seeking mandated scheme. We are in close dialogue with COSLA around this in terms of the asks that's been placed on East Ayrshire Council in an unpredictable and unplanned basis. We have a very effective model of support for our young people between the ages of 16 and above, and we've taken a strength-based aftercare model support, which has worked really well, and we've been complemented by both COSLA and Scottish Government in the role of both children, family, social work and our colleagues in housing services in achieving that. But it's incredibly challenging to achieve that model, and we are probably one of the lowest local authorities nationally with an under 16 population. So there's a likelihood that may be a risk factor moving forward in terms of us being mandated legally to take a child or young person who's came through that unaccompanied asylum seeking scheme. The financial output of OPSG is laid out in Table 4. We have been able to link in COVID recovery in regards to some of the children's plans in terms of the unplanned, unpredictable nature of some of the plans, and family breakdown has been a COVID cost factor. And through that, it was notified to notify the committee we have an overspend at 22-23 of 83,693. And just to highlight, at this stage, due to the unpredictable nature of out with placements, we are currently sitting at a projected expenditure of 5.8,854, which is an overspend of 167,724. Just to reassure committee, there's a huge amount of work going on to scrutinise the plans for children to ensure that we develop capacity and we're moving children safely, where appropriate, back to East Ayrshire to reduce the risk of that cost. Other than that, Chair, just to note the recommendations for report, I'm happy to take any points, questions. Probably apologies, I meant to note that my colleague from Outwith Placement Screening Group, Nicola Stewart's here as well, from an educational partner, can answer questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Charles. I mean, children, when they need care, complex care, Outwith care, are always going to need that care. So they're going to need it regardless of what the cost is. But understandably, there's a budget that you've got to keep working within as best you can. But in terms of the promise, do you think that we will ever be able to reduce the numbers of children that we have in our care within a realistic time scale?
Thanks, Chair. I don't know if being a social worker, I'm ever the optimist in terms of achieving change. And maybe it's why I do what I do. Yes, I think it is possible. It needs transformation, certain elements of how family support and how we might need to think about, and it's that question the promise asked was follow the money, about what's within the system, what might need to be invested nationally as a short-term gain to create that second, third horizon. It's that sort of disinvest to reinvest model. So right now we know there's a pressure point around need, but we also know that some of our children, young people come into care, their outcomes in life are not as effective as when with a family. We know that the children are most likely to end up within the adult justice system, being in our care. They are more likely to be impacted by poverty, mental health, addictions and other factors. And I suppose what we're trying to evidence through the work through the with Scottish Government is about what that public health model is about, preventative need, to try and think about this, because right now there are pressures here. We're experiencing this, our colleagues in education are experiencing around that need. How do you invest into a model that is going to take that sort of 5 to 10 year model that's going to see this over a bigger picture? One of the challenges is this seen as a landscape of change of 1 year, 2 years, and that's not going to be effective. It has to be seen under a 5-10 year model. That's what the promise looked to explore, but the promise landed in February 2020 and launched in February 2020. 6 weeks later, the world changed, and that created a whole level of need that we experience. Our colleagues in education will know as well, we have a generation of children who were significantly impacted by the relationships and community relationships by COVID, both the parents as well with their supports. We went in a lockdown for a period, and it's been difficult to capture a small group of children to try and get them back within schools, connected in with supports. And sometimes there has been, and you've seen this with some of our figures, that there's an unintentional consequence of that. To come back to the question, and yeah, the optimist says that we can, but it does take whole systems to achieve that.
Thanks, Charles. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Charles? No. I suppose we just have to keep doing what we're doing, Charles, and just hope that we find that transformational change. All righty, so thanks very much for your report, and thanks for your commitment and your passion to your work. Thanks, Charles. Okay, so it's over to Lisa and the annual assurance statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks approval to submit the annual assurance statement for 2023 to the Scottish Housing Regulator and to seek agreement of the annual assurance statement improvement action plan. Recommendations are set out at paragraph 2 of the report. Paragraphs 3 and 4 set out the background to the annual assurance statement, and members will recall that in February 2019, the Scottish Housing Regulator published its revised regulatory framework, the Regulation of Social Housing in Scotland. The framework sets out the regulatory requirement which must be met by all social landlords in Scotland. For local authorities, the regulatory requirements cover 5 broad areas which are set out within paragraph 3. Paragraphs 5 to 9 provide further information about the contents of the annual assurance statement, and members will note our compliance with all regulatory requirements contained within the self-assessment matrix at Appendix 1, with an associated action plan at Appendix 2 and the proposed annual assurance statement at Appendix 3. Paragraph 10 and 11 talks about gaining assurance and how this is fulfilled. It's up to each landlord to determine the most appropriate and effective way to gain assurance. Landlords should keep a record of evidence used, however, they're not required to submit this to the regulator, although the regulator may ask to see the evidence or elements of it if they're engaging with landlords. Paragraphs 12 to 17 discuss areas of non-compliance. Where a landlord identifies areas for improvements, appropriate action should be agreed to address these areas. Not all areas of non-compliance need to be recorded in the statement, and it's up to landlords to reach a judgment on whether the issue identified is material or significant, with any areas of material non-compliance disclosed in the statement. Whilst there are no areas of non-compliance within this report, paragraph 17 references the action plan Appendix 2. The inclusion of tenant safety within the action plan Appendix 2 ensures a continued focus on this area. Can I take this opportunity to draw committee's attention to Appendix 1 and the narrative in relation to tenant safety? On the 3rd of July 2023, the Scottish Housing Regulator informed landlords that they were looking for a clear statement in the annual assurance statement on landlords' compliance with relevant obligations in relation to tenant and resident safety. The Scottish Housing Regulator asked landlords to confirm whether they met all duties in relation to tenant and resident safety, and in particular that they have obtained appropriate assurance about their compliance with all relevant safety requirements, including electrical safety, asbestos, damp and mould, fire safety, gas safety, lift safety and water safety. Further information in relation to the statutory requirements and increased regulation in relation to tenant safety will be covered in the suite of housing papers presented to Cabinet in November. Implications are set out at paragraphs 18 to 21. The Council's annual assurance statement provides assurance to us as a landlord, tenants and other service users that we comply with the Scottish Housing Regulator's regulatory requirements and supports the vision and priorities within our strategic documents. Failure to submit an annual assurance statement by the 31st of October carries risk and governance implications which are set out within the report. To conclude, Chair, this is a positive report with regards to our compliance with the regulatory framework. Recommendations are set out at paragraph 2 and I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa. That is a positive report. I'm glad to see we've complied with the regulatory requirements. Again, good work, well done. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Lisa? Councillor Cogley.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much, Lisa, for the report. I understand there's some legislation going through shortly. Could you tell us what the implications of the legislation are going to be, please? Thank you.
Through you, Chair, and thanks very much for that question, Councillor Cogley. So we're actually expecting a draft housing bill to be published any time now, which will take account of the impact of housing to 2040, which is the long-standing strategy for how our houses will look and feel in the future. It will include information on the New Deal for Tenants, which is about regulating the entire rented sector and includes private landlords within that as well. And it also makes reference to the homeless prevention duty, which there's been a considerable piece of work on. In terms of what that means for the council, there's going to be really far-reaching implications in terms of the expectations for net zero and the standards within our homes. There's also regulatory requirements due to be refreshed, which will be published in April next year, and that takes account of tenant safety and landlords' compliance in that area as well. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. So just to come back on that, so as far as the regulatory framework is concerned, does that mean that the private rental sector will be uplifted to the social housing sector? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Cogley. So in terms of the Scottish Housing Regulator's regulatory framework, it only applies to registered social landlords and local authorities. However, the New Deal for Tenants is very much about bringing the private sector in line with local authority and registered social landlords, and about a real completeness for tenants across both sectors. So it talks about rent regulation as well as the conditions within homes, and there is an element of regulation for the private rented sector within that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Cogley. Does anybody else have any questions or comments for Lisa? No? We agree the recommendations. Thank you. Thanks very much, Lisa. Thank you. And over to David. Last but not least, embodied property transactions. Thank you very much for sitting through the whole meeting, David, for us.
I'll be here anyway, Chair, you know that. Thanks, Chair. I won't take any longer. This is one of our regular suite of papers that come through the year to Governance and Scrutiny Committee in promotion of the openness and transparent approach under the banner of accountability. The point being that the more you put out in the public domain about the business we transact, the more you can instill a greater degree of confidence in the integrity of that business by sharing the detail. So we've always reported on, amongst other things in this case, the property transactions we undertake that we buy and sell on behalf of the council, and it's a report that's been coming now for quite some time, and as with a lot of these, it benefits over time from the contribution of the committee itself. Like last year, the point was made about no distinction as to where the decision took, that these transactions were being made in furtherance of. So we've now built in, as you'll see, where Cabinet was involved in approving transactions as opposed to where they're done under delegation. In general terms, we did report last year to the committee, and as I say, we've reflected the changes made. And as we say in paragraph 2, we'll be hoping to bring this annually in future in September to cover the year from July to June in the previous year. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect budgets or anything else. It's simply factual report of outcomes for the record and to invite scrutiny as appropriate. Just very quickly, I won't go through the list. What you will see, I think we need to just tighten up. We'll keep an eye on it. There's two ways of looking at Cabinet delegated. We set out in the paper in the scheme of DELs, paragraph 4, that basically there's delegated authority to dispose of assets up to £100,000 and to acquire up to £1 million, which is a big scary figure that still seems awfully high to me. But when you get to page 260 then in the actual appendix 1, what you would see then is in terms of the Moorfield one, the first one, that could have been under delegation, but it was actually subject to one of the reports around the EGD and delivery of the projects at Moorfield. And buildings there, again, the two, the Portland Gate and the Ford Gate, were competent under delegation, but it's my recollection that they actually were included in the report to Cabinet on the multi-storey car park, and that Cabinet actually approved those transactions. So they may need to be amended. I'll need to check that. And obviously Cabinet took the report just about a year ago, agreeing to the acquisition of the two waste transfer stations following the demise of BAR's operations, not BAR the company, they're still going, but their discontinuation of the operation of the transfer stations, the opportunity was taken to buy them over, and as you'll see, they were concluded by Christmas and by February for South Hook. And the one at the bottom, I'm conscious we've got two eagle-eyed auditors in the room, so I'll get in first and highlight, having highlighted that the scheme of DELs is 100k disposal. You'll note then that the ground at Cameron Drive was slightly over that, and it is my recollection that did go through as a delegated disposal, but it was a kind of one-off. But we will make sure we pick that up in the future. That was where the council owned the ground that a certain former public house was built on. It's no longer a public house; it's a Chinese restaurant. Premier store, I think now, and that was the owners looking to buy out the ground lease so that they now own the building that is on the ground, and they own the ground, and that was their business interest to do that, and they approached us, and that was quite a capital receipt for a bit of ground that would have been of no use to the council at all. But I do think that was a delegated authority report, so I think we've slightly overstepped the mark, so apologies for that. We'll not let that happen again. And the rest of them kind of speak for themselves. The only thing I would say is what you do see there is a large number of house sales and purchases. That's in furtherance of the general housing policy that if we have the majority in a block, let's get full ownership in a block where we can. And if we only have one or two minority interest in a block, let's sell them on where we can, because the mixed tenure model we know is the most difficult to manage in terms of getting private owners to agree anything alongside public owner in the context of mixed tenure blocks. So we went for the all or nothing approach. That was the approved policy. So this is effectively the furtherance of that policy. And what you see there is a large number of transactions that we didn't used to get involved in, but we are supported by housing colleagues, and the HRA does actually fund, in recognition of the amount of work generated, it does fund a paralegal within the conveyancing team that actually undertakes most of this work. So we example a joint working there and managing the impacts of policy change. Other than that, if there's any other questions about any specific ones, I'll try and answer them, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, David. That's a good report. Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Alan. David, I wouldn't expect you to have the answer to this, but it's just because it's been a real eyesore for the people up in Ward 2, North West Kilmarnock for a while. Page 262, the property at 23 Comores Road, Kilmarnock. It's obviously been burnt out for a number of years. Noticed it was brought back into council ownership on the 6th of April. I know that the plan for that property is we've got a number of apprentices within the council, and I think the plan is to use that property as a sort of a centre of excellence where they will hone their skills under the correct supervision to bring that property back up to the standard where we can let it out as a family home. But I'm conscious that that's probably 6 months has passed now, and I just wondered if somebody could come back to me, possibly Blair Miller, whoever, at some point, and just let me know when the works are due to start on that property.
I can do better than that. I'll just bring in, through you, Chair Gary Craig, who I think will have full knowledge of that, hopefully.
Yeah, thanks. And through you, Chair. Yeah, we're still actually in discussion with the trade union regards using our own apprentices, and there's some discussion going on as to whether that's actually going to be feasible or not, or whether we're actually going to have to look outside. We can talk offline, but there's a lot of pressures coming in the number of voids and the workload that's coming through just now. So it's really difficult to provide that labour right now. But we're trying to sort out within Haas the best route for 23 Comores Road, because we're all aware of the implications there, and we all want it to be a good outcome. So we'll keep you updated, and I'll talk to you offline about it.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Mabin.
Hiya, thank you, Chair. Probably another one Gary could answer. It's 24 McPhail Drive. We've purchased that. Mrs. Adams passed away, so we've purchased that from her family. Is that next door to the house that burnt down, Mr. Clark's house? Sorry, I shouldn't say names. Apologies, Chair. There's a vacant lot there.
I don't know if Gary knows. If not, we will get that information, but worth a punt.
Yeah, I don't have the up-to-date answer regards that, Councillor Mabin, but I've got the officer that's working on that closely this afternoon in for a meeting, and we'll get you an update on where we are exactly with regards to that property.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for David? No. Can we recommend the recommendations? We can. Can we agree them? Thank you. And thank you very much. It's been a long meeting, but it's a lot of business has been done today. So thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And